Hello and welcome to a new vlog and ship video. Today we're taking a look at days 3 and 4 on board of the River Diamond. We're on the second cruise heading towards the tulip blossom in the Netherlands. We started in Hanau, we visited Königswinter in the last video, and now we're reaching Arnhem and then we're continuing on to Dordrecht. Here we are in Arnhem, and before taking a look at Arnhem itself, we started our excursion. We had a city walking tour, but we were joining the other excursion in the direction of the National Park Hoge Veluwe. Therefore, we are leaving Arnhem, heading north in the direction of the National Park Hoge Veluwe. Unfortunately, the spring hadn't really kicked off yet here. It was still looking a little bit wintry. There were no green leaves on the trees. That was a bit disappointing. We were hoping for a bit more of a spring landscape, but the landscape looked a bit like winter mode still. But nevertheless, we're gonna see some spectacular landscape in a few seconds. But we started with a panoramic drive through the national park, and we're heading towards the hunting residence St. Hubertus, which is a castle with a very beautiful architecture, a very symmetrical style. We're gonna see it a bit better in a second. Here we can see the hunting lodge St. Hubertus, and we drove around it with our bus, and then we reached the center point of the national park. There were several options for our guests. This excursion was planned as a panoramic drive so that everybody can join it. Even if you're not good with walking, you can still see a little bit of the national park by bus and then visit the cafe at the center point or the museum. But of course, you're gonna see a bit more of the park when you take one of the free bicycles which are included in the entrance fee of the parks, and then you head to the most spectacular part, to the dunes. As you can see, the landscape looks completely different here, and it's also quite fun to go through this unique landscape by bike. To me, it feels more like Africa than the Netherlands. If you would show me a picture of this landscape and ask me where it is, I would never guess that that's the Netherlands. I would for sure guess that it's somewhere in Africa, but it's actually the Netherlands, one of the most unique landscapes of the Netherlands. Of course, as I mentioned, it was not yet in its full beauty. It's gonna be more beautiful later on, as spring was kicking off here a little bit late this year. Of course, it's not a green landscape. It is a heath landscape with sand dunes and woodlands, so it's not the greenest part of the Netherlands, but it is a very, very unique landscape, and it's great fun to see this landscape by bike. After a bit of free time in the Hoge Veluwe, we took our bus back to the city center of Arnhem and back to the ship, of course, using a different route so that it's not getting boring. Also from the bus window you can now see the unique landscape of the Hoge Veluwe. We're then going through the city center of Arnhem, past the main station, which we will see in a second, which also has a very interesting architecture. Here we are at the main station, and then we are slowly heading towards the berths for river cruise ships, and they have been under construction for several years now. So in the last year it was nearly impossible to dock in Arnhem, so we were happy that it's now finished and we're finally able to dock again in Arnhem. So we had to use a little bit of time that was left to head into the city center, so we decided to have a typical Dutch lunch with fries and frikandel, and then we headed to the Eusebius church. This church is now used as a museum and a viewing tower, and there is a spectacular glass elevator leading all the way up to the top of the clock tower, and from there you're gonna have a fantastic and spectacular view over Arnhem. Already the ride with the elevator is spectacular, but of course the view is even more spectacular, and still the view is not the most spectacular part of the Eusebius church. Here we can see the view. We didn't have that much time, so we were just quickly enjoying the view, and then we were immediately heading back down a few meters to get to the most impressive part of the tower, which we will see in a second. And here we are at the most spectacular part. These are the glass balconies, and they are completely made out of glass. You're walking on glass and there's no ceiling, it's just glass around you. So you have the feeling that there's no ceiling at all and you're just gonna fall down when you continue walking. It is a very spectacular feeling, and to be honest, I'm not afraid of heights, but here I was quite happy to be able to leave this balcony after a few seconds of enjoying the view, because it's a strange feeling. So if you're afraid of heights, that's gonna be a challenge, but it's maybe a good challenge to try to fight against your fear of heights. So anyway, I can highly recommend visiting it because it is extremely spectacular. But we arrived last minute and now we're already leaving Arnhem again, heading to our next destination. We planned to visit Hellevoetsluis, which is a city close to the North Sea, but unfortunately there was a storm coming up, and together with the shipping company Starling Fleet and our captain we had to decide that it's too dangerous to go to Hellevoetsluis, and we're now going to Dordrecht instead. Hellevoetsluis is located right at the mouth of the Rhine-Meuse-Scheldt Delta, very close to the North Sea, where you have even stronger winds, and it's located at the so-called Haringvliet, which is a very wide water where you have bigger waves. And unfortunately this ship type, the twin cruiser, has one big disadvantage. Of course, the huge advantage is it has a hotel part and an engine part, and it's very calm. But it also means that the ship consists of two structures, and the linking point of these structures is the weakest point, especially with big waves. So it is too dangerous to cross the Haringvliet during a big storm. And additionally, the port entrance to Hellevoetsluis is extremely narrow, so it would have also been very dangerous to go into the port of Hellevoetsluis during a big storm. So that's why we decided to go to Dordrecht instead. The way to Dordrecht is very spectacular, as we are sailing the Niederrhein, passing two locks on our way and seeing the beautiful Dutch landscape where you can always see animals on the bank of the river. So it is very, very beautiful to sail through the Netherlands, and that's why we're also always including some daytime sailing in our schedules. We're now approaching another spectacular part. We are reaching an intersection between the Amsterdam Rhine Canal and the Niederrhein that we are on right now. So there are three directions in which we could head, but we have to turn left, so we're gonna make a sharp turn to the left now, and now we are reaching the Amsterdam Rhine Canal. There we're gonna reach a lock after just a few minutes, and we're just staying on this canal for a couple of hours before reaching Tiel and the river Waal, on which we will continue then. Here you can see how sharp we have to go to the left, and here we can see the lock, and it's a quite spectacular lock as it is constantly open. It will only be closed during high or low water situations, so at the moment we could just easily go through the lock without stopping as both gates were open. And after a fantastic dinner we reached the river Waal, and here we can already clearly see that there is a storm coming up already on the Waal. There were some big waves and very strong wind. It was almost impossible to open the doors to the front terrace as the wind was so strong, so it was very visible that it would have been too dangerous to go to Hellevoetsluis. Also, it was quite spectacular in our cabin on the lower deck with the portholes. We had the so-called washing machine effect as the big waves were reaching our windows. So that was also quite fun, but it also clearly showed why we were going to Dordrecht instead of Hellevoetsluis. And the next morning we've reached Dordrecht, and it was time to get up quite early as we're starting our first excursion at 8 in the morning. We're heading to the famous Keukenhof. The Keukenhof is one of the biggest tulip shows in the world and one of the most famous gardening shows in the world, and we are visiting on Easter Saturday, which is probably the day with the highest number of visitors in the season. Therefore, we wanted to be there as early as possible when it's not that crowded yet. Already on our way we could see the first fields of tulips or daffodils, which was already spectacular. Of course, it's always depending on luck how much flowers you're actually gonna see, because it's different each year at what time the most tulips are in blossom, but we were lucky this time. We're gonna see a lot of beautiful tulips. Here we can also see the International Bus Exposition, as there are usually hundreds of buses in front of the Keukenhof. And now we can enjoy beautiful tulips and other flowers, but especially tulips in all colors and shapes. There are countless different types of tulips that can be seen here at the Keukenhof. It is very spectacular, and I'm now gonna let you enjoy this beautiful park without my commentary, so just enjoy the beautiful flowers and landscape. In the meantime, we are now coming to the end of our visit. It was around noon, and as you can see, it is getting extremely busy now, so it's time to leave. I would never recommend visiting the Keukenhof in the afternoon. As you can see, it's very, very busy, and it's nearly impossible to take pictures there now without people on it. So I would always recommend going there in the morning, and that's why also we started our excursion this early. Usually we're not starting excursions already at 8 o'clock, but here at the Keukenhof visit, it is very smart to do so, as you're gonna enjoy at least a few hours without too many people, but it's still gonna be extremely busy. Of course, it's always a bit difficult to find the right amount of time at the Keukenhof, because it will always be too long for some guests and too short for others, but I think we had a quite good amount of time to see all parts of the Keukenhof without it being too long. But it was also time to get back to our ship, because we have another excursion in the afternoon. Just after lunch we're starting our second tour. It's a very busy day today. Luckily, the change from Hellevoetsluis to Dordrecht didn't change the timing with our first excursion to Keukenhof, as the time we needed to get there was about the same. But our second excursion is heading to the end of the port of Rotterdam, which is close to Hellevoetsluis, but more than half an hour away from Dordrecht. So unfortunately, we had to change the timings a little bit. We had a little bit less time at the Museum Portlantis, where you can get some information about the port of Rotterdam. Even though Portlantis is also spectacular, you can even enjoy a virtual flight over the port of Rotterdam, so it's spectacular. And also from the roof of the building you have a beautiful view over the beach and the North Sea, and of course the port as well. But the main highlight of this excursion was a cruise through the port of Rotterdam, and there are several types of cruises through the port of Rotterdam, and most cruise companies, the big ones, are offering a cruise in Rotterdam. But then you're only gonna see the small ships, because the big ships are not even getting close to the city center of Rotterdam. This part of the harbor is around 40 kilometers away from the city center of Rotterdam, and only this part is accessible for the very big ships. And that's why we had this excursion planned. It's gonna be very spectacular as soon as we're getting on board of our ship. It was privately chartered just for our group, so we're gonna enjoy a private harbor tour now with a Henry Hudson through the so-called Maasvlakte, the most spectacular part of the port of Rotterdam. and it's starting already spectacular. Here you can see a Chinese ship and you can see some cranes. But if you look closely, you can see that those cranes are not behind the ship, they are actually on the ship because they are made in China, and then they're gonna be brought here by ship, and I have no idea how that's gonna work with the stability of the ship, but as you can see, the ship made it to Rotterdam to deliver some new cranes. Here you can see a driverless container transporter, and you can get a quite good impression on how big those container ships actually are. Here we can see the Mette Maersk, and those ships are belonging to the biggest of their kind, so it is very impressive to see those ships from close. But of course there are also a lot of other very interesting ships. We were also quite lucky because as we sailed past the ship ever linking, it was leaving its berth, heading to the open seas, guided by 2 tugs. And here we can see a ship called Horten, which is also very interesting as it was the last ship that got through the Strait of Hormuz before it got closed. And also there are a lot of other interesting ships, also a lot of ships for special purposes, some very unique ships that we can see here, and you can only see them here in Maasvlakte, so this is the much more interesting harbor cruise compared to the regular one you can do in the city center of Rotterdam. Also here we can see a very interesting ship. This is a so-called semi-submersible ship. This ship has huge ballast tanks that can be flooded with water, and then the ship is sinking down. Another ship or other freight can be driven onto the platform in the middle of the ship, and then the tanks are pumped out and the freight is lifted above the waterline. With ships like this, also river cruise ships can be transported, for example, from the Rhine to the Rhone in France. So also a very spectacular type of ship. And now we're slowly and unfortunately coming already to an end of this very interesting cruise. You can take a look at a beautiful Henry Hudson, a nice ship for a cruise like this as it has big panoramic windows. And then it was time to head back to our ship, the River Diamond. After a very long day, we're now getting our well-earned dinner. It was a very long day indeed. We started at 8 o'clock in the morning with our excursion to Keukenhof, and we returned at 7:30 in the evening from our second excursion, so the dinner was well deserved. And during dinner we also left the port of Dordrecht, heading on to our next port of call, which will be in Belgium. It's the city of Antwerp. Also a very beautiful city, and of course we're gonna see that in the next video. To get there, we're sailing for a short moment on the outer mast, and then we're reaching the Deutsche Kill, on which we saw a beautiful sunset. And also here we had a quite interesting ship sailing past us as we were meeting an ocean-going vessel. It's quite rare that river cruise ships and ocean-going vessels are meeting somewhere. There are only a handful of cities where it's possible, and here in and around Rotterdam it is actually possible. Luckily there was not that much wind anymore, so we can now safely sail on the Hollandstiep and the Volkerak, which are also quite wide waters as you can see here, but luckily the wind and the waves were not that strong, so we could safely pass those areas to reach Antwerp, our destination for tomorrow. Here you can see when this video will be uploaded and the name of the song. As always, I'd like to say thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe or share the video link, and I hope to see you in my next video and one day maybe on board of one of our cruises with ReiseJung. In the video description you can find a link with more information.